Hey Adventurers, today is going to be another book review. This is going to be for Heliotrope by Palmer Pickering. Heliotrope is a high fantasy or epic fantasy or several other subgenres that it kind of fits into, and it's a self-published standalone, I'll get into more of that in just a second here, fantasy book. And so, let's see, so Heliotrope by Palmer Pickering, as I just mentioned, is a self-published fantasy standalone with the potential for more books after this as well. And it's about a ton of things. Lots of my favorite tropes are found within this novel. Lost magic, wise old mentor, found family, and so many more that I just find myself really liking whenever they're done, even if they're not done the greatest that I've ever seen. And in a lot of ways, this feels very much like a cozy fantasy, or at least kind of like a day in the life almost type of story. And I don't think that I would enjoy much of a cozy fantasy when that's the primary subgenre that it's part of, but when that's just one of the less important subgenres of the book, I find myself enjoying it. Before I get into the main body of my review here, I'd just quickly like to say, if you're liking what you're seeing from an Erudite adventurer, we'd really appreciate it if you would like, comment, and subscribe. So, I enjoyed this book quite a bit. I thought the magic was well developed, and it's got a really interesting blend of soft magic with some hard rules to it. The characters felt real. I never for a moment thought that this is not something that this type of character would be doing, or that I never felt that these weren't people, I thought, and that they were just characters in a book. I could see how they would be real people. This world is really well built, and it truly feels lived in a way that I find that sometimes fantasy worlds don't. Fantasy worlds feel too fresh, too clean. They don't feel like they've been lived in. They don't feel like there's a history to them. But I felt like with Heliotrope, that wasn't the case. I thought there was a lot about this world that was mentioned in passing or something like that that you wouldn't mind learning more about. This book starts out with our main character, Telio, working as a stonemason. And I'd have been perfectly content just to sit and listen to an entire book of Telio just doing his stoneworking, kind of like something similar to maybe The Secret Garden or something like that, but in a fantasy world. And I think that would have just been great. And that's not what this book is, but that's how it starts out, and it's really enjoyable. First chapter or two, I forget exactly how many it is. Eventually, though, we get into the story of this book, and it becomes a journey. I love quest fantasy, I love adventure fantasy, and so this wasn't really something that was too far out of my comfort zone by any means at all. And one of the major plot lines of this book is that the characters have to discover the lost magic. As I mentioned, this is one of my favorite tropes, lost anything really, lost city, lost civilization, lost magic, any of those types of tropes where there's something that's lost that has to be rediscovered. I find that I love them. So having that be such a big part of this story worked extremely well for me. There's also a bit of a twist on the wise old mentor, as well as our hero being an older hero, being somebody who's lived some life, who's a little bit not in his prime anymore. This is, of course, because our hero, our main character, is older, and he is the wise old mentor as well. So it's kind of takes those two tropes, blends them and mixes them a little bit, and gives us a twist on him that we don't often see. But he's not without his own flaws and issues, and he's still able to have some character growth, which oftentimes the wise old mentor is the character that is the rock, that is the foundation that everything else kind of builds around, because he's the one who's teaching the mentee character. We also get one of my favorite tropes that I actually don't know the name of, but that I've seen several times, and every time I see it, I love it. And this is where we're in a location that seems to be amazing. It seems to be idyllic and just perfect, and nothing's bad or wrong about this. But as you stay there, you quickly start to realize there's a dark, dangerous secret that keeps you from escaping. You aren't exactly trapped necessarily, maybe you are, but you're supposedly free to leave whenever you want, but for some reason you can't. And maybe you don't understand it, maybe you don't want to, maybe you don't know, but you start thinking about leaving, or maybe should I leave, or something like that. And what you ultimately end up deciding on is that you don't really want to leave, you're okay staying here for a little bit longer. And just the creepy and unnervingness of that trope always works so well for me, and again, here it does the same thing where I just end up loving it. So this book doesn't shy away from being brutal and gory at times, and there was a bit of language scattered throughout. Mostly it was done in such a way that it didn't really detract from the story or take over or pull me out of the storytelling, or anything like that, but it was there, and I did notice it, which is sometimes I don't notice it, and so if I do notice it, that means that it was worse than or more prominent than at other times. I think my biggest complaint though is that one of the relationships in maybe more than one, but at least one specifically that I'm thinking about, really seems to come out of nowhere. It just seems to happen really fast, and I know that in world it doesn't because of the way that time is passing in story and in world. But for me as a reader, or specifically a listener because I listened to the audiobook, it just felt a little rushed. A bit more page time dedicated to developing this relationship could have really helped it to seem less like it was coming out of nowhere and more like it was a natural progression for these characters. Overall though, I did really enjoy the time I spent with this book, and I thought the narrator did a good job of being the voice of Telio, and it fit the story really well. But I did have a bit of an issue with the clarity of the recording. It's not that it was specifically garbled or anything like that, it was just not as crisp, and I couldn't quite turn it up loud enough to hear it in the way that I needed to understand it without having to actually slow the audio speed down a little bit. Usually I can listen to a book on times 2 speed because that's closer to my actual physical reading speed, and it fits better. I can understand it. My brain keeps track of the story a little bit better at times 2 speed. But because of the audiobook, the way that it was recorded, I would say, I couldn't quite do that because I couldn't quite understand what was going on at that speed. So I had to slow it down. And so it did actually take me a while to get through this book, even though I was enjoying the story. I enjoyed the voice of the narrator. There was a lot about this book that I didn't enjoy, but the audiobook was not as clear as I needed it to be. So anyways, that is my review for Heliotrope by Palmer Pickering. I quite enjoyed this book, and I think it's a really good self-published novel. So thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. We're posting quite a few videos at the moment, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay warm.